us today. We've got a healthy group that's joined, and we'll look forward to some more coming in. Welcome. My name is Joe Sommer. I'm the Executive Director of Episcopal Parish Network, and we are so pleased to have you here today. Thanks so much for taking time out of your Tuesday and a holiday season to join us for this conversation about growth opportunities outside of traditional models. We're thrilled to have a wonderful panel to discuss this today, and we look forward to the conversation that's upcoming. I want to remind you about the 40th annual EPN Annual Conference that will be taking place February 25th through 28th in Kansas City, Missouri. And we are pleased to have our new presiding bishop, Sean Rowe, as one of our keynote presenters, and he'll also be with our rectors and deans. So those rectors and deans on the call, you'll please join us for the pre-conference that we have for you all. We're excited about that and about all of the great programming that we have. Many of these folks will be joining us as part of our programming. So hopefully we will see you in Kansas City, and you can learn more about that in the link that I am posting in the chat. Also invite you to put your name and where you are dialing in from into the chat for our panelists. And without anything else from me, I'm going to wish everyone a very blessed Advent and turn it over to Bill Kessler. Bill, thanks for taking it over.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And thank you to Episcopal Parish Network for providing this opportunity. I wanted to begin by very briefly introducing our panelists and introducing the program. I'm sure all of you who are here know why you're here, and you've read the summary description. But if I could summarize the summary, we're here because we all have assets. We all have needs, which often exceed the assets that we have to manage them, and we all have a purpose. And this is done in a world that is changing ever so quickly. So there are several moving targets that we try to bring into alignment so that we can accomplish our changing purposes and our new purposes, if they are new, with our assets, with the least amount of disruption, and in a manner that meets the needs that we have, both our institutions and our constituents. So the people that are on the panel today, I would like to introduce Dana Dabak, who is Director of Transition Services for Partners of Sacred Places. Many of you know Partners of Sacred Places, and you may know Dana. She, in her role, helps congregations reimagine their spaces and places within their communities so that they can examine their relationship with their properties. And she's in Philadelphia, but she works with them everywhere in the country, bringing 20 years of experience, not just with Partners of Sacred Places, but with other kinds of nonprofits in the education and cultural communities. Secondly, Dave Ashworth, and I think the names are labeled on the webinar pictures, so you'll know who Dave is. Dave comes at this webinar from a company called Campus Innovations Group. He's a managing member there. He and his partner, Jeff Stone, who I'll introduce shortly, both have established an organization that does just what we intend to talk about today, of deploying assets or considering assets in a way that enables us to better meet our needs in this changing world. Dave started doing this in the healthcare world, the nonprofit sector of the healthcare world, where he was head of one of the largest healthcare systems in the state of Texas. And in that role, he managed growth, acquisitions, mergers, ventures. He created and shared a for-profit real estate hospital development and management company. So in a nonprofit, very large scale nonprofit situation, he was able to hone some of the skills and practices that we'll be hearing about today and hear his perspective on. Jeff Stone, who is the founder and also a managing member of Campus Innovations Group, has advised nonprofits in higher education, healthcare, and faith-based organizations most intensively with faith-based organizations in recent years. He's been in commercial banking, real estate, 40 years in those industries, advising nonprofits, domestic, offshore, institutional owners of real estate, those who own real estate. He's held a number of leadership roles, started companies, managed partnerships. He's a graduate of Southern Methodist University, sits on a innovation council for SMU, and has held a number of board roles with nonprofits and faith-based organizations. I'm going to ask each of the panelists as they engage for the first time in the conversation to supplement the brief introduction that I gave each of them with relevant information. But it's most fitting that we begin with Dana. It's most fitting because Dana is usually the first one in line. She's the person, hopefully, that organizations will turn to as they examine the dilemmas that they face of having assets, some of them of a historical, traditional nature that embody the institution in so many ways that are indescribable sometimes, but are so real. Yet the realities of the world that we live in require us to consider using them in a different way than may have been envisioned. So Dana's role is so important because she forces the conversation to why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we engaged in, why do we even have these assets? And so I want to turn to her first to explain how she would consider ideally this process begins of discernment around assets, particularly real estate assets, and why the institution even has them in the first place.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So as Bill had mentioned, I'm the Director of Transition Services at Partners for Sacred Places. And I want to define a little bit what we mean when we say transitions, because I think that kind of helps understand where our work is falling within that process. So we think of transitions as a congregation being in transition anytime they're contemplating or re-examining their relationship to their building and property. So that can mean a lot of different ways in which those assets are leveraged. It could mean bringing in mission-aligned groups to rent the space or rent the space more intensively or exclusively, all the way to thinking through, if we need to move out of this building, what would that look like? So in our process, we start with that discernment piece. We start with, as a congregation, you've come to the conclusion that the way that you're currently continuing on may not be financially sustainable in the long term. So how do you decide, A, what that best next first step is, but also how do you do it in a way that honors your legacy as a congregation, your mission in the community, and your role within the community? And we do that through the process of developing a property mission statement. So your congregation has a mission for its ministry, for its programs. Your parish has a mission, but so does the property. It was built, purpose-built for a reason, and that developing that mission statement can help you think through some of those key questions of what would our property look like if it was fulfilling the mission of the parish on any given day? What would we not want to happen in the building? What was the values? What are the legacy? What are the moments in our history that have dictated the way we've used this building? Taking a lot of that information, taking a lot of that data, and coming up with a statement that can become that guiding light for you as you make those decisions further down the line, leveraging your assets, but keeping it rooted within your history, your legacy, your mission, your values, and your role within the community.
And Dana, when you do that, what is its conclusion after you've developed this property mission statement and you've very closely examined those relationships? Tell us what are the decision points from there for a group or the leadership of an institution?
Yeah, absolutely. So that mission statement really serves as that guiding moment, that guiding point as you take that discernment further down. So as part of that conversation, we would talk about what are some of your options moving forward based on that mission statement. What options make the most sense? So for example, if your mission statement talks specifically about feeding the hungry, right? When we think through the options for those next steps, how do we then integrate that spirit of feeding the hungry into either the organizations you invite in to collaborate or partner with, what you decide to do with your kitchen, or what the next stage of that building's life cycle might be? How does it continue that role within the community, even if you're no longer the one who owns or possesses that asset? So once we've sort of worked through what are some of those options, again, coming out of legacy, coming out of mission, coming out of community role, we can then hand the parish off or hand the project off to the next group that can help take those options and bring them into reality. But you're coming into that next stage of the process with a really good sense of who you are and who you want to be, which makes those next steps a lot easier and makes you ready to really tackle what a larger project might look like.
So Dave, in your experience, once an institution, let's say a church congregation, has really through all this searching and discernment, not only understands who it is, but what kind of community needs they've discerned are out there that can be accomplished through some redeployment of assets. Can you share with us, either through case study or through just general narrative description, what would be some next steps in identifying, defining those options, and where do you go from there?
Great, thank you. And thanks, everybody. I appreciate being here and sharing some ideas and thoughts with y'all. I think what Dana has outlined is the perfect way to initiate discussions about strategic visioning, options for the future. In particular, the property mission statement becomes kind of the guiding principles for all further analytical processes. Campus Innovations Group, what we do is we tend to focus on the balance sheet, performing, non-performing assets, deferred maintenance, cash position, assets, liabilities. And from there, deferred maintenance, I think I mentioned. And from there, what we really do is we begin forecasting scenarios that would be identified through the property mission statement and mission line direction, which is all part of what Dana does work on. By critically assessing both the current state and looking at future state opportunities, again, guided by that property mission statement and the guiding principles that it outlines, we can begin to test a number of scenarios about what future options might be. A lot of these come through not just an analytical review of things, but through a lot of discussions with the client, the council members, the elders, the vestry, the lay leadership, the staff, the clergy, all of those folks that begin to share their ideas about what they think the current situation is and what the opportunities are for the future. And then we begin to kind of stress test those. And we do it against a number of variables and a number of scenarios. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I think we have found that testing the unthinkable has become incredibly important, because over the last 5 or 10 years, we have seen a lot of the unthinkable things happen that people frankly never would have considered, like global pandemics and things like that. So we do kind of not just take the middle ground of scenarios, but we really try to stress the whole thing. What we have found is that by doing this, there are generally three categories that people fall in. One, they are kind of very successful, they are thriving, they are growing, and what they are looking for are continued ideas about how to continue their growth, continue their success, determine future growth opportunities and options. And one of their advantages is they have the ability to forecast 3 to 5 years out because they have the time to do it. Their negotiating position is very strong because they're thriving and they're growing. The second category I would call is the sustained category, and these are folks that are stable. They may choose in their forecasting to elevate themselves from being stable to wanting to go into the thriving growth category. They may choose that being a sustainable organization fits their market, fits their needs. But they also may see in their forecasts that there are some very dark clouds on the horizon that threaten their ability to retain their sustained category. And what they then have is the value of time to begin to look at what their options might be: mergers, acquisitions, beginning new joint ventures on affiliated businesses. And their negotiating position is still quite influential and viable to do a lot of that. The third category I'd call the distress category. They tend to be more budget to actual focus. They are focused on the present because of their financial concerns. They don't really have the opportunity to do a lot of forecasting because they don't have the resources to do that. And they're pretty much in a survival mode. They may choose to try to upgrade themselves through various strategies to jump into that sustainable category, or they may want to begin to focus on kind of the orderly monetization and distribution of their assets. And it's critical that they understand what they're doing that for. And that's again where this the property mission statement and the mission aligned direction comes into play. Because if I could backtrack a little bit on, well, let me just finish. The distress group, their negotiating position is very weak. Their time frame is not very long. And all of these groups, timing is a real asset to the situation. Whether you're thriving or growth or distressed, timing is a very, very critical thing. A lot of folks that are seeing some dark clouds on the horizon may want to delay decision making. They may be hoping that there will be, a new benefactor or new money coming in or growth in the congregation. But by those delays, they are tabling one of their most valuable assets, and that is time. Because as time goes on, if your position is decreasing, so are your options, and so is your negotiating position. One thing I just wanted to add about CIG and myself, I come from a faith-based, nonprofit, large healthcare system in North Texas. We are one of the largest in Texas. And I want to emphasize the faith-based aspect of it because we were a product of a merger between Methodists, Presbyterians, Catholics, a community hospital, and for the longest time, a Baptist healthcare system. And one of the things I've learned is the issue isn't which theology wins out, because all of them have at their core a set of values. And we would be living whatever theology if we just defined our values and lived our values. And that is a critical element, I think, that Jeff and I and our group bring to the table. And that is, we are not transaction folks. We hope to be seen as strategic partners that walk this process from kind of when Dana hands it over to the deeper dive, that we're not just waiting at the back end for a transaction to occur. we are very much engaged with trying to figure out the best way forward for the organizations.
And that's so important when you're discerning the options, to not have a bias either by limited past experience or limited perspective because of the vocation that you happen to be in. Having someone advising the institution who just by their background and their perspective can, in an even-handed way, evaluate the whole range of options is oh so important. Just as having Dana's very broad-based perspective and being in a role of a door opener to ideas and not a door closer. That sort of expansive thinking is so important in the early discernment process, but keeping that door open as you're evaluating options and not being limited by your what experience you happen to be bringing to the table is equally as important.
I think
And
to follow up with what, oh, sorry, Dana.
I was just going to say, I think that logic also crosses over tax status. For example, there are a lot of opportunities that for-profit companies can bring to a nonprofit without fear of jeopardizing tax status or earnest problems or whatever. And it really broadens the opportunity to bring in new money. And having built a for-profit company under a nonprofit umbrella, and having been the president of a national for-profit, privately held healthcare real estate development company, there are a lot of opportunities. As we look at opportunities, they are much broader than just playing off of the not-for-profit model without losing what the nonprofit holds dear, which again comes back to one of the things Dana said about the property mission statement and mission line direction. Jeff, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of punctuate what you said, Dave, about not being transaction oriented. There was a faith-based organization that we were involved with. They were looking for someone that basically would handle a transaction. They were a thriving congregation. They had bought additional land for potential either growth or investment purposes. But we frankly, respectfully said, we don't know if you know enough yet to go the direction you want to go to hire someone just for a transaction. And, you know, they were very open to that statement, and they said, what would you propose? And we said, well, we would first sit down and look at your mission and your purpose as an organization, but also how the additional land that you have, if you want to monetize it, how does that fit within your mission and your purpose? And we raised the question, do you really want to sell it? Would you consider a ground lease? There's the alternative of a joint venture. And with that, each one of those different scenarios carries different financial risks, different legal risks, and may or may not benefit the longer term mission of the faith-based organization in the short run or the long run. So in that situation, we had a series of charrettes with both a subgroup working on behalf of ad hoc committee working on behalf of the elders. And we had these discussions about where's the direction of the church going long term. Do you need that land for growth? If you don't need it for growth, what would be an alternative use that would be complementary to the organization and fit within the mission and purpose? And what does that transaction look like? So in that case, we spent many months just as really strategy sessions to try to understand what's the right direction. And at the end of the day, the right answer for them came up to the surface.
But we took a much different approach than everyone else they'd been talking to that just saw a transaction. And just because they initially thought they wanted to go one direction, we created a process to further refine how that would work within their mission and purpose. So
I think that values piece there is really important in terms of thinking through and broadening the idea of mission alignment. Like you both said, taking a lot of those faith-based values that are part of your parish, that are part of your parish identity, and thinking about them translating more secularly can help open up nonprofits, businesses, as you said, Dave, to be able to think through what does mission alignment look like and what are some of those bolder, more creative ways we can stay within mission alignment, leverage those assets, but still remain within our values. So thinking through, if what your values might be, if they're compassion, if they're service, what does that look like to a secular organization, to another faith-based nonprofit, to a business, and how do you use that to think through some of those creative partnerships that maintain that alignment?
As a lead into, before I get to a question that's out there, Dana, I'd like to hear a segue from that. I suspect the way a discernment group is constituted is incredibly important in order to have the expansive thinking, in order to avoid channeling ourselves. Do you have any just practical tips or experiences that you could share about how a congregation might get started in creating a think tank or a group that is discerning itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So we recommend, we developed the property mission statement as part of the strategic visioning process, and we recommend pulling together a team of, I'd say, no less than 6, depending on the size of your congregation, and no more than 10. And a mix of clergy, of vestry, of other lay leadership, but also a mix of different voices and opinions. And you all know within your parish who your yay-sayers are and who your naysayers are, and making sure that those voices are represented as a part of that team. Because at the end of the day, you don't want the property mission statement to sit in that committee and never come back out again. You want to be able to take it to the parish as a whole and have it be adopted as part of your language and as part of your identity. So making sure that that team, I'd say more than even the roles within your parish, although you might want your warden to be a part of conversations around your building. It's also important to have that good mix of opinions, mix of ages, if you can, different stages of life. So that way, when you're pulling that mission statement together, while the team is representing the whole of the parish, it doesn't feel as though they're creating something in a vacuum, or that there's a sense of, this elite group got together to then dictate to everyone else. It helps with that buy-in, because a property mission statement that doesn't feel good to the parish as the whole doesn't normally go very far.
And having that representative group of opinion leaders, thought leaders, people who are trusted is important, regardless of whether they have real estate experience or discernment experience.
This is vision.
Yeah.
This is vision. This is big sky. This is, having something that allows you to make those bold, creative decisions because it's rooted in something. It's rooted in your legacy, rooted in your mission, rooted in who you think you are, who you believe yourselves to be as a parish and as your identity. So yeah, inviting all of them, sometimes depending if you have a space user in your building who's already using a significant amount of space, who you don't see any reason to not continue to use a significant amount of space, sometimes we'll even recommend inviting them to be a part of the team. So that they don't feel as though this process is in any way to undermine their current relationship with you. If you have any doubts about continuing that relationship, do not put them as part of the team. But in the interest of getting that diversity of voices and opinions, it can be helpful to pull them into the process as well.
So we have a question that I find is often asked in connection with webinars around real estate with Episcopal Parish Network, and that has to do with scale. If I'm a small parish, does this really apply to me? Is this something that's really actionable? And it's such a relevant question right now because Episcopal Parish Network itself has been changing and broadening its scope so that it's not by definition only larger, well-resourced parishes, but it's the entire spectrum of Episcopal parishes in the United States. So I have seen this pattern of questioning if we're a small parish, can we really do these things that are prescribed, or is this only for the big guys? Do you want to? I'd like all three of you to comment on that and help us understand how we can scale these grand ideas. Dave, maybe we could start with you.
I would say that it is both. It's not either. It is the larger, thriving, growing organizations have a certain opportunity for them that say that the smaller, stable, or distressed ones don't, but they all have issues and they all need a path forward. And again, I just want to emphasize that this idea of the property mission statement must come first. And it doesn't matter if you're a financially strong, growing organization or a distressed one, you should always know what the mission is for your properties and your assets. And how do you define it? And then, because as the world changes, which it will, the mission statement becomes the guiding principles. And as one that has worked a lot in mergers and acquisitions, and have seen most of them work, but some of them failed and not get through the negotiation. Oftentimes it comes by you get halfway through or 3/4 of the way through a negotiation, and you've been putting off the toughest questions. You've been putting off, in our case, board and governance issues and control issues. Your guiding principles and your mission statements help give you direction on that from the very get-go. And so, for example, while you absolutely would need to do the property owner would need to do a full assessment of the physical condition and the potential uses of the property and their repurposing options, which is something, Building Solutions does, and you well know, you wouldn't do that before you do the mission statement. You would do the mission statement first to understand what the opportunities are going downstream. And to get back to the original question, I think all organizations need to have that kind of roadmap. It's the ones that wait till the very end to do it that are in the weakest position to do anything with all the results.
I would also add that there may be small parishes, but they may be sitting on some fairly large tracts of land. And then the question is, how can I unlock the value tied up in that land to use towards my mission and purpose long term? They can also help me financially gain a stronger footing. And in many cases, that may be complementary opportunities. It could be assisted living. It could be branded assisted living. It could be a commercial opportunity because of the location of the property. That could be very attractive. We've seen St. Michael's and All Angels in Dallas, a very large, thriving group in Dallas. They had excess land and they very successfully worked out an arrangement with a very large national developer to build multifamily as well as office on land because the land was very strategically located in a very desirable area. And for St. Michael's and All Angels, it generates significant financial returns back to them. Again, these can be a ground lease, they can be a sale. In that case, it was directed towards the commercial viability because of the location. But that very well could have been a small church on a piece of land that has commercial opportunities as well. So as Dave said, it's not just for large churches or small ones. It really comes down to, is there an opportunity to unlock value tied up in the real estate? And again, it doesn't always have to be a sale. It can be a long-term ground lease that generate long-term source of income, or you can have a front-loaded ground lease where the ground rent is paid up front, and it has the financial impact of feeling like a sale, but it's still a ground lease. So
One
whether
of the
large or small, parishes can take advantage.
Sorry to Greg, Jeff didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
One of the, this is a segue, one of the concerns that's reflected in some of the questions is around what are the boundaries on what churches can do and cannot do without jeopardizing their tax exempt status. Jeff, maybe you could follow on your commentary with your comment on that. Dan, all three of you may have something to say.
well, in the case of one situation, they bought this property for investment purposes. Most likely, it's a taxable transaction if they sell it, or if there's a commercial use put on there. It's probably not going to be a nonprofit. There are various ways to structure it. In this particular situation, the land that they held for potential investment purposes, really the highest and best use was a high-rise apartment building. On the other hand, there was a lot of discussion, does that really fit within the mission and purpose of the church? Some really wanted to have an affordable housing development there. So the give and take is, do you sell the land for less and have an affordable housing project there, or do you sell it for the highest price you can and then use those proceeds towards the mission and purpose of the church going forward to other goals and growth prospects they have? So it really depends.
Deanna, have you encountered situations where Episcopal churches are limited by diocesan rules about limits on sale disposition?
Yes, absolutely. And certainly, not the only denomination that has that process in which needing to get some type of approval around usage. I would say, and not to continue to tout the property mission statement, but that also provides something that you can bring to the diocese to show that you've done the work and you've done the thought process behind examining some of these options. So that can help kind of open that conversation in terms of what you want to do with that building. So I worked particularly with a Methodist church in Oak Park, Illinois, that also has a lot of the same structure where the conference needs to weigh into any type of offloading of assets. And they were able to invite their district superintendent to be part of the process. They came, one part of the process we call the community conversation. So that way you're getting community stakeholders involved in the themes and the values that are reflected within the mission statement. And the district superintendent came. After coming to that event and seeing what was generated, seeing the community needs, seeing the way that the building could fulfill community needs, became much more open to a lot of the options that the church was presenting to the conference as potential lease or sale. So, being able to kind of pull the diocese into those conversations, using that mission statement, using that engagement with the community as part of opening that door to those conversations can be very fruitful and helpful.
I happen to have heard the rector at St. Michael speak about this, so I can validate what is coming across in the chat, but not everyone may be monitoring the chat to know this, that the proceeds from the real estate transaction or the real estate arrangement with the rental property is that the proceeds are devoted to their outreach program. So it's not operations, it's not, I mean, I'm not sure what all the things that it's not covering, but it is designated for to fulfill one of the ministries of the church, namely its outreach, which would probably be a factor in all that. There's an appetite here in the among the questions for, and I think this would, well, all three of you, but I think particularly Jeff and David, after we've looked at options, what are some of the models that can be used for redeploying assets from a legal ownership structure standpoint? And Dan, I'm going to ask you quickly afterwards to also talk a little bit about what are the variety of redeployment to serve ministries or establish partnerships, meet other community needs that might not involve a major real estate transaction, but simply a reuse or reallocation of space. Who would like to start with that?
I'll start. I see that Russell and Karen have some questions that I think I can combine. From a very simple standpoint, how do you identify community members that you might want to work with that might share a similar vision and direction? And candidly, I think the answer to that is to have conversations with them. Oftentimes, people that you might be interested in, you're not even on their radar. And they won't know that. They won't know what the opportunities are until you talk to them. An example. I work with a group called Cancer Support Community, and we are looking at trying to take our services more into the community. Well, churches, houses of faith have a lot of vacant space throughout the week, and it's non-performing space. And it could be a lot cheaper for these two nonprofits to come together and work out an amenable where the rent is lower than going to the commercial market for cancer support, and the church is getting income to offset basically a sunk cost. On the other hand, on the other end of a larger thing, for a church that might have an associated school of almost any grade level with it, we're seeing senior housing starting to work with schools for intergenerational learning. And to the extent that the church might have property, as Jeff was saying, you could do a ground lease. And there was a question about how do you finance these? Well, you come up with a business plan, or that business plan identifies who your partners are going to be. You use the credit worthiness of your partners, assuming it's a little stronger than the church's in this case. And then you build in your financing plan. I'm not big for private equity money going into these things, but there's a lot of commercial sources and other private sources to do it. And Jeff, I'm going to kick this one to you because this is more your area of expertise.
Well, I think, Mary asked a good question. How does one finance a development project until it generates income? Our diocese needs to approve these projects before parish undertakes such a project. The goal in most of these is to shift completely the development risk onto somebody else. And in one situation, when we were going through and looking at a sale, joint venture, a ground lease, we recommended that the organization also hire outside counsel. And we posed a number of items that we wanted their counsel to look at, namely the legal risk. We can give anecdotal stories, but we wanted them to be able to explain to the church in this situation what was the legal risk under which there would be a ground lease. or a joint venture. We know there's operational issues in a joint venture. They're problematic to begin with. But even if it's a ground lease, the question is, if someone builds on that ground lease and they default, what happens to the ground lessor, right? Are they really in a position to make, to make current a project that may be in default? And so getting to a comfort level of who you're doing business with, the cultural comfort, the mission alignment, and the financial soundness of who you're doing business with is really, really important, because you hope, they're going to be stewards of that property for a long time. But what ends up happening is the church is going to be around a lot longer than that developer will probably end up owning that development. So what gets built, the quality of what gets built, and the financial wherewithal of the developer to execute and deliver that project is really important. But the goal is to shift the financial risk and the lease up obligation to someone else you're doing business with. The church doesn't want to take that financial risk on. In different types of transactions, there is that risk. So in each case, we want to make sure that that risk is walled off.
And including the legal risk associated with unrelated business income, and that topic that is in the questions, but I think maybe beyond the scope of this for us.
Dave, you may want to talk about the UBIT situations, maybe from, the healthcare platform, and which was in other businesses as well.
Well, I'm not a tax person, but I will say this: unrelated business income, providing it's acquired legally, is not illegal. But a nonprofit would have to pay taxes on it. So unrelated business income through a business totally unrelated to the nonprofit's mission is, as long as it's legally acquired, is totally fine. They're just going to have to pay taxes on it. But it's new money. It's a new revenue stream. You're diversifying your revenue streams by doing it. And if you have to pay 20% of it off in taxes, you've still made 80% you weren't making the year before.
Without jeopardizing your overall status.
As long as you're paying your taxes on it, you don't jeopardize your tax exempt status. But I hasten to add, that's why you need a tax accountant attorney to work with you on these things. Again, I keep coming back to the property mission statement. The property mission statement may definitively say, I don't want to go down that road, because that's the things they talk about. But if you say, I would like to explore it, then the next deeper dive is, what are the terms, conditions, and parameters around which we can do that safely to protect the assets of the organization. But unrelated business income is providing it's acquired legally is not illegal for a nonprofit. They just have to pay taxes on it.
I would quickly just add, also not a tax attorney or a tax accountant, but one of the things, especially when we're talking about congregations who maybe are just starting exploring bringing in rental income, is after consulting a tax person about what some of that UBIT might be, perhaps building that into the rental rate. So that is sort of a part of the cost that's going to the person who's renting the space, if you're afraid to take that on as part of your own budget.
Deanna, while you have the floor, just a garden variety of examples of partnerships, alliances.
Yeah, absolutely. So it can take a lot of different forms, and a lot of it has to do with what your asset might look like, right? So I worked with a congregation in Fort Myers, Florida, who was sitting on 12.5 acres of wetlands. So land that might not be prime for certain types of development. They were in a high development area and had some really faith-based feelings and concerns around stewardship, particularly sustainability and stewardship, and didn't necessarily want to build on the land, but wanted to find ways to better operationalize it. They worked with one of their local universities who was looking to add on to their agricultural extension classes. in a way that allowed them to use that land, get some income from that partnership, but also maintain it in a way that aligned with their mission around environmental stewardship. So that is one example. And then there's also smaller ways in which, we asked the question about congregational capacity. If the idea of taking on a large development project maybe isn't quite in your wheelhouse, thinking through some of those mission-aligned partners, using those values, and finding ways to just begin to derive income from a meeting room that is only being used once a week. How can you bring in those mission-aligned groups? And when I say how can you bring them in, I mean physically. So Karen, you had asked the question about talking points with working with other mission-aligned groups. We encourage you to bring them into your space. Part of that community conversation is inviting in groups that have mission alignment to say, come see our space, come talk to us about the needs you see in the community and how our space can work to address those needs. It opens up the conversation. And I will tell you that there are people in your community who drive by your building every day and wonder what it looks like on the outside, who may come and engage with you as a part of that process because they're curious and they're excited that there's possibilities for new spaces within the community, spaces that have always been there, but are maybe new to them.
In one of the
Sometimes it-
transactions that we were consulting on, we actually, the elders wanted to understand what a market rate multifamily project would look like. So we helped them select a design architect, and it was very inexpensive to do some conceptual designs of what a high-rise apartment would look like across the street. Secondly, we also socialized with all the neighboring owners of the properties to just talk about what the potential vision was for that property. It served two purposes. One, to let them know what was going on, and number two, some of the neighbors may have an interest in the property as well. And the church wanted to be a good neighbor. And, they found that to be very beneficial in working with.
I'm gonna initiate a lightning round right now. We have less than 5 minutes. Dave?
I just think it's really important that people begin, who haven't initiated this effort, they begin to plan their future. They take into consideration the things we have discussed, and don't make it happenstance. Make it a thorough effort to really assess the current situation and future opportunities.
Dana?
Yeah, a lot of times coming into this process, it's scary. It's scary to think of new ideas. It's scary to embark on big changes in the way that you see your space and the way that you see your physical assets. And allowing that time to step back and think through how our property can help fulfill our mission, the mission of our parish, the mission of our community outreach, of our engagement, can help ease a bit of that process because the change feels hopeful.
I want to since time is the issue right now in our webinar, I'd like to come back to one of the beginning topics or aspects of this that we looked at in the beginning of our hour, and that is time and the importance of time and the way in which time can limit your options and reduce the effectiveness of whatever steps you do take. It sounds to me like a property mission statement is something that is going to be helpful to a parish, regardless of whether they even believe that they're in a position where they need to reconsider the deployment of their assets or their real estate. Just like the work that I do is primarily physical condition related, and the function of space for churches. That similarly, in my experience, knowing the condition your space is in, what the cost requirements are of maintaining it, renewing it, replacing it, is useful regardless of the status and the age and the condition of the of the property. It's just a good piece of management information to have. One thing I've learned today, Dana, with your participation is here's another tool, another way that we can usefully examine who we are, what we have, that might even lead us in some directions of redefining our purpose or expanding our purpose or making our purpose more easily met by partnering. So I think if there's anything that comes out of this, that it's not too early to consider the mission of our property, whether we think it's too early or not necessary or not, because if we wait, it may be too late to do everything that we can.
Mhm.
I think it's going to be time to close up, but I thank you panelists very much. Thank Episcopal Parish Network. We are avid supporters and fans of EPN and proudly have been a resource to EPN in real estate matters, facilities matters, and look forward to seeing you at the meeting in Kansas City, Missouri, and would be happy to entertain questions or contacts. I believe our contact information will be in the webinar when it's sent to those who attended. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of the late breaking questions, but I promise you we will look at them. If Joe Swimmer will provide them, we'll be happy to parse those out and still respond to them, even though we can't during the course of this meeting. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.